The Caucasus mountain range in Georgia. These peaks, higher than any in the Alps, are the historic borderlands between Europe and Asia. This is the only road link into Russia, a long winding route from the Georgian capital through the mountains to the frontier. And I've come here in search of an answer, the missing part of a puzzle I've been trying to solve for months.
Tonight, we bring you another Sky News exclusive exposé on how Russia's rich are still managing to buy new luxury cars.
We've just had the latest data through £26 million worth of exports in February.
Over the past year, I've been tracking the flow of sanctioned goods, including luxury cars, into Russia.
But just look at what's happened over the same period with car exports to Azerbaijan. They have gone up at an unprecedented rate.
The figures say these goods are going to Caucasus states like Azerbaijan and Georgia instead. But we know they're still ending up in Moscow showrooms. So how? After months of research, we got a lead.
Now, if you listen to the car lobby group in the UK, you might have assumed that the cars, once they get to the Caucasus, they basically stay there. That's what the data is suggesting. But we've had a tip-off that they are getting across into Russia, but in a way that means they don't show up in those official export statistics. We've had photos and videos sent to us from the border showing UK, German, Japanese cars there waiting to cross over.
That's why I've come to Georgia, to the Lars checkpoint, to see what really happens when the data trail ends, and to see those Range Rovers for myself. It's an extraordinary sight, truck after truck lined up to get over the border. We don't know what's inside them, but there's no hiding the luxury vehicles which have also been brought here. In a dusty car park behind an empty cafe and a small store, there are cars with a combined value of millions of pounds, all of them sanctioned, all of them waiting 100 yards from the border. This is the Mercedes Maybach GLS, starting price £177,000. But no one bats an eyelid or stops us as we film the vehicles.
Okay, and then to here.
After a while, we find a driver who explains some of the process.
These are private orders. We transport from the ports of Batumi and Poti. Our responsibility is mainly to ensure the safe delivery of the cars.
New and old? Is it new and second-hand cars?
We transport all kinds, depending on the client, what the dealer sends and what the owner receives.
So who drives them over the border? Is it the owners or is it another business?
We're not fully involved in every detail of the process. Mostly it's the owner. If the owner is not Georgian, they take care of the documentation and handle the transportation as usual.
A few hundred yards up the road, another informal car park, and row upon row of brand new high-end vehicles, some of them still with their factory wrappings on, most without registration plates, and a fair few Georgians and Russians hanging around. Unlike Ilya, who we met earlier, these men are mostly taking the cars on the next leg.
They don't really want to talk to us on camera, but they were saying that essentially it's their job to take the cars from here across the border, and then they leave them there and then someone picks them up. So someone within Russia then picks them up and takes them to wherever it might be.
And here's the key bit. Because the cars are mostly being taken into Russia by individual drivers, they don't show up in the customs data. They just put transit plates on the outside and, as with these two BMWs, they drive them over, alongside the trucks, across the border. Many Russian brokers have relocated to Georgia to run this flourishing trade. Online, they provide detailed explanations of how it's done.
Спрашивают, в каком направлении вы будете вести автомобиль. Так вот, очень важный момент, что вы гражданин.
This YouTuber says, when you're asked where you're taking the car, here's the important thing. You need to say you're a Russian citizen taking the car to Kyrgyzstan. But let's be honest, everyone knows it's really going to Russia. Finally, the routes for these sanctioned goods is becoming clear. They leave Europe and head for the Caucasus, sometimes Azerbaijan, sometimes Georgia, Once there, they're sometimes moved into Armenia, where they get a fresh registration and customs clearance. Then they're transported north through Georgia and over the Russian border, usually one car at a time. That way, they show up in Russia, but they don't show up in the customs data. But while we saw that process happening for plenty of German cars at the border, we didn't spot any British vehicles.
I've come back to check on those Range Rovers, and as you can probably see, they're not here anymore, which leaves one to presume they too have crossed the border into Russia.
So, after a couple of days, we left and headed south. Until something unexpected happened.
He's stopping. Guys, he's stopping. So we were on our way back from the border towards Tbilisi, the capital. And then, lo and behold, what did we run into but another car carrier carrying what looks like a brand new Range Rover.
We followed as it drove up the mountain. Soon enough, it was joined by a second Range Rover. We were part of a convoy of sanctioned cars. Driving up, heading for the border, day gave way to dusk, and still we carried on north towards Russia. We arrived, back where we'd started, as night fell. What was a relatively quiet spot during the day had transformed into a hive of activity. And the British cars weren't the only ones freshly delivered.
Feels like it's kind of peak time now. There's one Range Rover being unloaded. Another one just came off that truck over there. There's a Lamborghini over there. So all of these cars arriving. We've spoken to one of the drivers, doesn't really want to talk on camera. He says he's just delivering these cars right now. And for the most part, they just stay here until potentially tomorrow, potentially a few days later. That's when they go across the border.
The following morning, the car park had fallen quiet once again, but the cars were still there, waiting for the next leg of their journey.
So check the VIN numbers, the fingerprints essentially on this car and the other Range Rover brought here overnight, and they both say the same thing. Made in Solihull in 2024, this year. In other words, 2 years after sanctions were imposed on Russia that were supposed to prevent these cars going in, here they are. And this is just one of a number of different routes taking items like this, and indeed weaponry and equipment, into Russia. It's happening in plain sight.
Jaguar Land Rover told Sky News these cars were originally sold into a different country which doesn't share a border with Russia. It said JLR stopped sales of vehicles to Russia and Belarus in February 2022. It continues to adapt its compliance strategies to counter the efforts of third parties seeking to circumvent sanctions against Russia and Belarus. When Russia invaded Ukraine, G7 ministers insisted they'd fight Vladimir Putin with economic weapons. That meant stopping flows of certain goods into Russia, but the goods are still flowing. From weapons parts carried in on trucks to luxury cars for those bolstering the regime. Here in the borderlands of Europe, everyone knows what's going on, even if it's not there in the data. You've just seen it with your own eyes. What was proclaimed as the toughest sanctions regime in history is anything but.